As a wee lad who honestly thought D&D was one nerdy step too far for him, the first class I played when I eventually decided to give this stupid dice game a go was the Bard. A funny class, I thought, someone who just goes around banging a drum while everyone else dies around them. I imagined I would die within the first session, but somehow, some way, my unoptimized dwarven Bard made it all the way to the end of a years-long campaign. At that point, ghouls and gals, I fell in love with bards. To me, they are the best and my favourite class in all of Dungeons & Dragons, and even though they may seem like they can't cast as well as the wizards, or fight as well as the fighters, in a game where you have to do 100 different things, their jack-of-all-trades style of play will let you have a blast, no matter the situation. So, if you're looking to start your bard's epic journey, or you want to step up your storytelling in sonnets, here are some quick tips on how to be the best bard you can be. Tip number 1. Lean into being a face. Okay, this sounds really obvious, but if you're going to be playing a bard, chances are you will be your party's face. Maxing out charisma and having expertise, likely in your persuasion, deception, performance, intimidation, or some mix of the four, means that you, better than anybody else, is the person who should be leading conversations and trying to grind down that shopkeep for the extra 10% off a magic item. For players who don't like the spotlight, I would say you don't necessarily have to play your bard as the stereotypical attention hog, the person who makes themselves known whenever they enter the room, but instead you could play it quieter, not necessarily starting a conversation but analysing what NPCs say, waiting for the perfect moment to add something to the discussion. Usually your persuasion, deception and intimidation rolls will be prompted by what you say rather than you just saying you want to do any of these actions. Therefore you don't necessarily have to engage in small talk and be an open book all the time, but I would say that even if you don't want to be the stereotypical bard, you should know this is the most charisma based class in all of D&D, and you're going to shine most outside of combat when you're using your silver tongue with insane pluses to your speech rolls. For players much more comfortable with talking to NPCs, I would say similar advice applies. The Bard is arguably the strongest class outside of combat besides maybe the Rogue, and you shouldn't be afraid to show that. Your party needs you as much as you need the Barbarian to get the Dragon's attention by hitting it super hard in the head. Treat conversations with NPCs, especially tense ones, or those where you have a goal in mind, like a mini battle on a different field. Not in the sense that you're pitting yourself against the DM, but instead you should have a plan for what your party or character wants, the lies and truths they'll use to get it, and have a backup in case it doesn't work. This especially helps if you're not so hot with the improv. Tip number 2. Let your star shine on others. Okay, so for my first point, I have told you to shine as brightly as you can in conversations. Get stuck in there and be the baddest person on the battlefield of words, or the nicest. Really, you can go either way with the Bard. That's the beauty of them. However, even though you will be the star when it comes to conversations, and you may even end up as the de facto party leader similar to Chris Pine's Edgin in Honor Among Thieves, you shouldn't be the only person getting the limelight, and there are plenty of ways to help out your party while being the primary talker. I'm not saying to shut up unless you're called upon for a persuasion role, I'm instead asking that you look at what your character can do as a bard and help your party through that. You are a support class at the end of the day, and while that might be most obvious in combat, your goal both in and out of it should be making the party better, not just yourself. When you speak with an NPC, think about how this conversation can help not just you, but those around you. Is there a magic item on sale that your wizard would really love to have? Is there something from a quest giver that your rogue wishes to ask for, but fears their persuasion isn't high enough? Would you like to stick it to a villain that showed up from your paladin's past to help that paladin know they have found a new family in the party? It is these little things that will help your bard feel less like the guy who always speaks over people and forces themselves into the spotlight. It is almost impossible not to seem like you're fond of the limelight as a bard, as you will naturally gravitate to talking and being the front man. But this is a band at the end of the day where everyone has their own skills and abilities. So long as you don't talk over someone when it's their time, and so long as you don't step on any toes, you should be good to use your moments to lift other party members up as well as yourself. I think it's something that Sam Riegel does very well in Critical Role. Even though he's gone for different classes over the years and different campaigns, Sam is just a bard at heart, and yet he manages to bring at least one character along with him to share in the spotlight he creates. In Campaign 1, that's Grog, and he helps make an investment in the Barbarian, which is hard to do considering outside of combat, a Barbarian can sometimes feel neutered. Tip number 3. Don't go down the typical bard path. For the past 2 points, I've basically been saying, do the usual bard stuff. Speak to people, help your friends, probably play an instrument or think of a little ditty. Now, I'm going to ask you kindly to pack up all those notes, stuff them in your backpack, and throw that thing out of the bloody window. This tip might be more for the experienced players, those that have gone through a bard once before and are looking for a different kind of flair. We all know the flamboyant, flagrant bard who wears nothing but teal and pink, tries to seduce everything that breathes, and has a unique piercing just to prove how much attention they need. We've seen it all before, and depending on how you run that character, it can risk being as annoying as the edgy rogue who refuses to interact with the party and instead decides to make their own adventure. The terrible tightrope you walk as a bard is being the person who is expected to talk the most, while also avoiding making the sessions your own TV show as much as possible. As we've all seen that bard with a fancy accent who wields a lute and is as free as they want to be when it comes to dropping their pants, you might want to take a different approach. Even in the player guide for the bard, Wizards of the Coasts points out a few different ways you can still encompass everything the class is about without going down the stereotypical route. You could be a stern, stoic warrior who bangs a sword against his armour to pump up his companions, a spy who uses deadly whispers in order to bring down her enemies, or a scholar who prefers to retell his learnings in song rather than in a book. If you look at the different colleges you can take as a bard, and all the ways you can play them, from healer to counterspell machine to support to frontline damage dealer, you'll quickly see this class is more than just making the DM put on a sexy voice so you can feel more comfortable trying to seduce your friend. Think of all the charismatic people you know, either in real life or in media, and think of all the ways they show that charisma. Yes, there is the loud, obnoxious way you can go about it, but there's also a quieter confidence, what the kids call BDE, Bard, open brackets, who is capable of, close brackets, doing everything. Then you've got people who just effortlessly charm without even trying, and those who might have a different sort of charisma, like a character who's so adorable they can't help but be loved, or someone who is so pathetic they get pity wins all the time. You can also look at your backstory for this, deciding how you entertain as a bard as well. You can be a singer, or perhaps you're an acrobatic artist, or even something wild like a shadow puppet showman. You could also appear to be as basic as you can be on the outside, but twist that stereotype into something deeper by holding a darker secret within. Tip number 4. Embrace doing lots of different things. My first 3 tips were about building your character and making them as good of a bard as they can be in both roleplay and their narrative, but we're not just writing stories here. Maybe your bard is, but there's also a game to play at the table, one where you're going to have to get used to doing a lot of different things. I always think of a bard as the great slot filler in any party. Let's say you have a druid, paladin and wizard in your party. You've got a tank with the druid, your damage and healing with the paladin, and the wizard as your main spellcasting damage. So your bard should really adapt to the rest of that party composition. Getting some support spells like Fairy Fire, Enhance Ability and Blindness/Deafness means you could control up enemies, leaving your wizard to blast them. It's always worth taking some things that help your speech checks outside of combat too, like Friends or Disguise Self. The Bard spell list is massive, and it encompasses almost everything you could want in a full caster. Unless you go Lore Bard and take some massive damage spells, you're not going to be the best at anything, but you can be damn good at a lot of things as a Bard, which is why I recommend knowing your party composition when you go in with this class. With Jack of all trades as well, you're going to naturally slot into doing all the things that no one else can do, even if you're not particularly good at them. No wisdom characters in the party? Sorry, but you're the automatic perception and inside roller now. No one to pick a lock? Best get some thieves tools training, my guy, as otherwise the whole heist plan is going to pot. If you're a newer player, or someone who likes to just do one thing really well, then a bard can still be for you, as you have the expertise, skills you're amazing at and can use reliably as we looked over before. But you've also got the best versatility in the game, and to not make use of that would be a bit of a shame. I always rock up with a bard that has a checklist of things to cover within their spells, and they are something to heal. Usually I just take Healing Word because even though you can do better, no one ever says no to a bit of extra HP on a bonus action. Something to deal damage. Again, if we're looking at level 1 spells here, Dissonant Whispers is a great option and one of the only spells in the game which can provoke an opportunity attack immediately after being cast for some big damage, especially if you're running a melee bard. Then I'll look for something useful outside of combat. Minor Illusion or Mage Hand are usually good enough on their own as cantrips, but Disguise Self, as I said, can allow for a lot of fun ways to get into interesting conversations and show your strongest stuff. You could also grab Detect Magic or Identify if you're needed for those things as well. Finally, I'll always have something that's either a buff to my party or a debuff to enemies. Fairy Fire and Sleep are great level 1 options for the latter, and for the former, Heroism and Featherfall have their uses too. Tip number 5, spam Bardic Inspiration. This is the most specific tip I'm going to give here. Bards are incredibly versatile, and so it is really hard to play them wrong. There are a few things they can't do, like act as a fully fledged tank, although now that I say that, you know someone has a build out there for that. But otherwise, play as you'd like to play, and you'll be fine. Cast some spells, hit things with a sword or bow, do some chatting, all that good stuff. However, something that you must remember to do is spam your bardic inspiration while also reminding yourself and others who have it. Bardic Inspiration is one of the rare abilities in the game which essentially allows someone on your team, and you when you reach a high enough level, to give the DM a middle finger slightly and say, no, actually I will be succeeding this role. Early on, it is harder to spam this ability, as you'll only get as many Bardic Inspirations as your Charisma modifier on a long rest, meaning you'll get 5 max. Once you get Font of Inspiration, which recharges your inspirations on a short rest, it is easier to just keep throwing them out, as you know you can recharge them in a moment. You might think, as Bardic Inspirations are a limited resource, that you should think carefully about when to use them, but if you've got a party of 4 or so and each inspiration lasts 10 minutes unless used, you'll be able to throw an inspiration at every one of your party mates and give them that boost within a combat very easily. Most combats tend not to last too long really, and so you might not even be able to use all your inspirations by the time it's over. Outside of combat, of course, Bardic Inspiration is also useful, and so feel free to throw it out whenever you think it could help the most. There's no reason to hoard this ability for that perfect moment, as that moment may never come. Better to give your paladin that extra boost to their attack roll, or your rogue the perfect stealth roll, than lose out on those opportunities. Also, once you've used Bardic Inspiration, it's actually up to your party mates to make the most of it. So yeah, go ham. And obviously, if you're playing a subclass like Swords Bard, where you use inspirations for other means, you can still spam it, just with a focus on yourself and your strikes. I hope with these tips you can turn yourself from a troubled troubadour into a savant storyteller. The Bard is my favourite class in D&D by far, and they are really capable of everything, even if they don't necessarily do any one thing better than another class besides talking. Keep those tips in mind, let me know if you have any extra helpful tips for Bard players, and I'll see you soon for another video. Bye bye.